Greetings and welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm State Representative Mike Mrowicki from the Wyndham 4 District of Putney and Dummerston, and we are here to kick off the 2023 legislative session. Today my guest is Representative Sara Coffey of Guilford Vernon. It's Wyndham 1, right?
Yes.
And the new chair of the House Transportation Committee. Welcome and congratulations.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. It's always great to have conversations with you, but isn't it great that we have started in person this biennium?
It is. Last year we didn't, and it made a big difference to be able to get back after a few weeks. It's such a different experience. No offense to the people who work on Zoom or a lot of do video, but it's one-dimensional. And what we do is so relational.
Absolutely.
It's important to have that face-to-face and the ability in the moment to have the conversations and not have to wait for a Zoom room or whatever we're doing otherwise. So it's good to be back.
It's good to be back, and I'll say too, I was an anthropology major in college, and so I really love rituals and performance. Yeah. And so being there in person, really at the start of the biennium, these first ceremonial days that we had that are the days that we quite literally open up the house for our business. And then at the end of the 2 years, we will do another set of rituals that literally closes the house.
And the terminology we use is Sine Day.
Yes, and I think it's wonderful for those. It grounds us in our work. Yeah. It also grounds our new members, who we have a lot of this year. Yeah. And so it feels just terrific to be back in person. Yeah. And yes, I'm really quite honored to be appointed by the Speaker to be the chair of the House Transportation Committee.
Yeah, a very important committee, especially as climate raises its ugly head more and more. I'm watching California getting hammered with storm after storm, and how we're experiencing the reality of storms, an odd winter, what's going to happen to the ski industry, the maple industry. So many things to talk about in that regard, but I'd like to actually start with something outside your purview, and that's something that's really important, something we've been pushing for a number of years, and that's paid family and medical leave. COVID certainly amplified how important something like that is, and how I think we may be the last industrial country in the world not to have such a family-friendly policy. But it looks like we're going to get it done. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think there are 11 other states in the United States that have passed a version of paid family leave. So we know there's some really interesting models out there. And I think I'll say, constituents ask me about, our governor proposed a model, a paid family leave model, which is a volunteer. It's not the same number of weeks that we're talking about, 6-week versus 12-week that we're proposing, and that'd be run by a private insurance company. So the way when I talk to constituents, we had my coffee hours this weekend, and when it's a volunteer system, then only businesses or folks who are in a position to participate, to pay for it, can participate in it. And it leaves those smaller businesses, those folks who might not be making, as independent workers, a higher wage, and it leaves a lot of people behind. One of the things that in this version that we know is going to be coming to the floor, one of the things I'm excited about is that it is also will include contract workers, because what we did learn during the pandemic was that Vermont has a really high number of folks who are freelance workers who work on a contract. And we had to develop a special unemployment benefit for those folks when the pandemic hit. So I'm pleased to see, maybe the silver lining of us not getting it passed a few years ago is that we learned a lot from the pandemic, and I think we'll be able to deliver a stronger package for Vermonters. Yeah,
it's a great point you make about the gig economy that we found out from COVID. There are so many Vermonters that are independent contractors that work on their own and needed that help just as well, that wouldn't be available otherwise. So this will be something they can avail themselves of. And as you said, COVID just showed us the need for something like this.
And I also think it's also will help small businesses and businesses in general who want to be able to offer an insurance like this, but because will now be within their reach to offer. Because otherwise, businesses are dealing. The employees have children, they have family, they have employees who have family members who need care, and right now they're on their own to help those employees. Yeah. So I think it's a win-win for workers and businesses.
Yeah, and the people I've talked to, I've found pretty widespread support, especially people with children, young children, because there's that fear that there's so many working parents out in the workforce. What happens to their job? The child gets sick. But the benefits are beyond that as well, because for the sandwich people who are taking care of kids and their parents, it's just as important to be able to take time off to take care of their parents. And it's time. It's time we did this. So I'm looking forward to that. It will be interesting to see the dynamic that comes into play with the governor and with our caucus. So hopefully we can get to a place of agreement and do some good work for the people of Vermont.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it unfolds. And as when legislation is introduced, it's an idea that it's the beginning of a process. So we have a really thorough process of hearing from more folks, shaping the policy, and it rarely, if ever, comes out the way it began.
And it's a good point. Most people focus on product, where legislation is really about process, to make sure as many voices get heard as possible. And whether we agree with them, we're going to listen. And I think that's a big point. Some people get disappointed if they may say we're not listening to them because we disagree. We are listening. It's just that we happen to disagree and we're going to go in a different direction. Just because we're not giving you what you want doesn't mean we're not listening. But we do want to hear from you. And this is going to be a big shift for a lot of people, a lot of businesses. So we're going to have public hearings. We're going to have a lot of input from legislators. So that process will unfold.
Yeah, and I've found in several instances that by listening, sometimes it really does help inform the way I approach it, or thinking about a piece of policy, proposed policy that's in front of us. So so I'm looking forward to digging into that. And maybe the other thing that we might want to mention is we've heard a lot about childcare, affordable childcare, and that's not. We're waiting to hear from an important study about how this week it's coming. It'll be coming out. About how recommendations on how we can pay for it, because the legislature's goal is that families spend no more than 10% of their income on annual income on childcare, and we know that in order to have good quality childcare, you need to pay people a decent living wage. So it's an important balance that we need to strike. You and I, in our caucus, our delegation down here, have heard a lot about this. This has been an ongoing issue, and it's important for families. It's important for small businesses, and
workforce
and our workforce. So. This will be another big bill that we'll continue to work on. And like a lot of bills, it's not just one and done. This has been something that has been in the works and we've been working on for several years. Yeah.
I think we all know people who have actually left the workforce because what they were paying for childcare, economically it made as much sense for them to stay home as to turn over most of their paycheck just to pay for childcare so they could work, and that's got to change. Again, the rest of the world does that. If we just look north of us to what Canada does, it's a similar situation, and it doesn't hurt their businesses.
Right, and I think I'm a member of the Women's Caucus. I've been the co-chair for the last 2 years, and the pandemic really showed us there was we lost a huge number of workers, women workers from the workforce because of the pandemic, and we have not regained those folks in the workforce. And as a lot of people know, we have an aging workforce in Vermont, and we really can't afford to lose folks who are of working age and who have talents and energy, from our workforce. So it's important for a number of reasons. So that'll be. I'm looking forward to tackling that, and our friends in the House Human Services Committee have a big. Will play
a heavy lift.
A heavy lift and a big role in that.
Yeah, and thank you again for your work with the Women's Caucus, because that really highlighted how this wasn't just a women's issue, but that's where it came from, because it affects everybody. It affects the workforce, it affects families, and we can do better.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really nice. In the Women's Caucus, we have a few men too, which is terrific, because we know, as you said, like, these are not just women's issues; they're really kind of our society's issues.
Yeah, it affects us all. Just as an aside, the whole issue of women in the legislature is something that I think really shows how we do things different here in Vermont. Now, we saw what happened in the U.S. House of Representatives. I just wanted to let you know. It took us 12 minutes to nominate and elect a speaker in the Vermont House of Representatives, and all of our women in leadership. And I would say, as an observer to this, it's the number of women we have in the Vermont House that changes the dynamic. I believe women use power differently, as power with, rather than power over. And what we saw in Washington was just all about power and showboating, and we don't have that in Vermont. And my feeling is we have, I think, 46% of the House is now women, and most of those Democrats. It changes the dynamic.
And how many years have you been in the?
Yeah.
Is this the beginning of your
ninth term?
Ninth term. So you have some perspective on this.
I've watched that change, and we've had women speakers before, but the number of women changes how the committees work, how the whole body, and there's no better example than to see how we do business here in Vermont, and you look at the chaos that's just starting in the U.S. House, and it's not the way to do it.
It was hard. The Women's Caucus organized a watch party at the State House to watch our first woman member of Congress be sworn in. And, the swearing in was scheduled to happen. And as everybody knows now, that you need to elect the speaker first before members can be sworn in. We have the same process in the Vermont House. But, we were gathering at 12 o'clock to watch it. Then it got bumped back to 3 o'clock, and then it kept getting bumped back. And as we know, I'm quite grateful to be doing this work in Vermont, where it is a much more collaborative environment, and where there's a lot of respect. And it's not to say that there are not powerful people and using their influence, I think, for the good of Vermonters, but it is, I would say the flavor is much more collaborative than what we see in other spaces, let's just say.
Yeah, and I think it shows both the speaker, Democratic majority leader, Republican minority leader are all women in the Vermont House, and it's a different dynamic. I'm glad to be part of that, and I appreciate collaboration much more than the idea of who has the most power.
Yeah. We
share it.
Yeah. And it's, there's a lot of talk about the supermajority that we now have in the House, and I think, speaking to that, now that we have the supermajority, it's not something to use unwisely. It's a huge responsibility, and I intend to use it, wisely, but also to really get a few things across the finish line that we've struggled with in the past by one vote, by not having the necessary one vote to override the veto from the governor.
So here you are, Chair, House Transportation, at a time when transportation is such a vital issue, just with business, with commerce, with climate, with an aging population. Can you share a little bit about what you hope to accomplish this year?
Sure. Well, it's, the Transportation Committee has a pretty large purview, and I want to say, it's it is the space in Vermont where we're doing a lot of our work to address climate change. The transportation sector contributes 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to say that, the House Transportation Committee over the last 4 years has really taken, standing on the shoulders of those who came before me in doing this work, because there's been a lot of innovation in the thinking of how to address this. And with the influx of federal dollars, new federal dollars, a real opportunity.
From the
IIJ,
Reduction Act?
the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA, which is, I can't remember what the full name, but these are two pieces of legislation that came out of Congress, and we'll be also looking at the recent budget that passed in December, because there are some things, when last biennium's committee, they were able to put in a lot of money to address. I'm going to read some of the programs, because I think people who might be watching may or may not be aware. I want to say there's a terrific, very user-friendly website, Drive Electric, that lists some of the programs and the incentives. And there's a cool tool with a calculator about how you can calculate what is available to you, and it has all the models of cars that have, and with the information and what could be right for you that would be eligible for some of these incentives.
So is this driveelectric.com or .gov? Or?
Yeah, it's driveelectric.com, and they're working with the state government to do this. They're kind of for lack of a better word, the public-facing arm. Because as we know, all of us have been on government websites. They are not necessarily easy to navigate or use, because they're trying to do a lot of things. So just a couple of the programs that we've passed over the last couple of years. We have an incentive program for all sorts of electric vehicles, but including hybrid and fully electric vehicles. We have a Mileage Smart program, which allows income-eligible Vermonters to purchase a used electric vehicle or more fuel-efficient vehicles. We have an electric bike incentive program, because really we're finding that when we have roadways and sidewalks and bike lanes, people can more easily ride their bikes to work rather than using their cars. And we had $100,000 in this program that got gobbled up pretty quickly. And we're hoping that we can put some more money in that program. And then replacing your ride is another one about, moving to more fuel-efficient vehicles. A big piece of all this, of course, is the electric vehicle infrastructure. And we've been fortunate enough to get several funding streams through the federal government to help us do this work. So that the goal is that we have charging stations within 1 mile of any interstate.
Different levels, or are these?
They're different. We're
seeing a lot of level 1 out there, but that's not very helpful if you're in a hurry, right?
Right. So this is all kind of unfolding, because as we've seen with other things, this is in demand now. But it's actually a really great. It's important to say that this is one way that we're going to spur on a new part of our economy. This is part of the green economy. So the Agency of Transportation, often VTrans, there's an interagency working group that's been working with the Department of Housing and Community Development within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And I'm reading from my notes because there's a lot of details to these programs. So, we used we have funding for multi-unit dwellings so that there can be charging there. We will have money, there's a whole deployment plan that came out this summer that is a guide for, we have to be strategic with these investments so that charging infrastructure can meet the federal program requirements, but also that make sense so that people who are visiting our state can easily and quickly charge. But also there are incentives for folks who purchase electric vehicles to get free charging. I know my husband bought an electric vehicle, and through Green Mountain Power, we got a free charger. And so, a lot of people are going to be charging vehicles at their homes, but, whether it's workplaces or, what I'm excited about is that by putting some of this EV charging infrastructure in our downtowns, throughout Vermont. It'll invite people to experience some of our greatest assets that we have, these really charming and interesting downtowns throughout Vermont. So I know this is going to be something that we're going to be focusing on. And we did have put in, last year, we put in significant funding that we imagined would last for a few years with these incentives. But, it is a little bit daunting, the goal that we need to reach in order to really address our greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we got this testimony on Friday, we heard from an update on the Climate Action Plan. That was a plan that came out of the Climate Council that was created through the Global Warming Solutions Act. Yeah. And I just say this out loud because, we in the legislature took our aspirational goals that everybody had agreed upon, but we made it a requirement by embedding it in state statute that we must meet these goals. So we have to get, I believe it's 126,000 electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles on the road in Vermont by 2030, I think, in order for us to meet. I'm going to double check 2030 or 2050 in order to meet these really ambitious goals. And there's a great graphic slide that maybe we'll be able to insert here in the program to show Vermonters and our constituents what those goals are and how we're going to do it. So transportation is the area that I'm focusing on. We also know that the thermal sector is a big piece of it.
What about public transportation? So
public transportation is really important piece of all of this. And one of the things that the pandemic afforded us was some money to experiment, actually, to do things with microtransit, which microtransit is another word for saying things like that you can call, and get a ride. And there are a couple of pilot programs going on in different parts of the state, to encourage and be more flexible. They've been doing a lot of studies, and we've gotten some of the preliminary. We'll be hearing more in our committee about this, but what a fixed route versus a on-demand route can do. And we've had since the pandemic zero fare, so it's been free. To encourage workers to be able to get to use public transportation. I think we're going to have to find a balance, because with all of that. But I think really part of it is about how do we increase ridership, whether it's zero fare or more communication and better public relations around what's available to folks. So because I know for example, while we have a lot of housing strains on housing, we do have more public transportation in our bigger downtowns, but a lot of folks are living outside of those downtown areas, and that's where some affordable housing is. So how do we serve those Vermonters who have jobs that might not have a vehicle or might have a vehicle that's unreliable? So this will be a really important part of the work. The committee also, I learned, we have 10 airports in Vermont. So they're under, which 2 of them are commercial airports. Others are, for folks who are flying in and out of the state. A lot of them located near our recreational areas, and also our rails. So Amtrak and freight. And one of the interesting, if I can toss out a statistic about, because it relates to climate, there's a lot that happens on our rail system that we don't necessarily see. We have something, we have rail cars carrying freight. It's really interesting that something from the transporting goods that are produced in Vermont to Vermont. That is a huge percentage. It's over 80% of the freight. Which is great. The other piece is that it's taking by having cars freight. We can a lot more capacity than what can be in tractor trailer trucks. So it's something, I think the statistic was, we can reduce the number of tractor trailers on our highways by 200 a day by this. So which is significant when it comes to climate change. So, our priority is going to be, we have been how to maximize our federal dollars that are coming into the state, because the transportation budget, which comes through this committee in the form of a bill, is upwards of $850 million each year. And many of those projects are funded through on a regular basis through the Federal Highway Program and other, the FAA and others. And it's typically that we have to, it's an 80% comes from the federal government and 20 that we have to use state revenue. And so there are a number of sources where we get this state revenue. And so, we are very careful about, if a dollar can leverage another $4 to make a project happen, that's pretty significant. But some of all of these EV incentives came from our one-time money. So it's going to be an interesting challenge. We're looking at, I'm sure you heard our state economist's report on the revenue forecast for the state of Vermont. And many of our revenues are up, but one area where it's down is in our what we collect at the the transportation fund. So this is not being caused by people adopting EVs. This is being caused by folks having more fuel efficient cars, people being able to work from home, and our changing habits. So one of the ways we're going to be looking at how we bring in some of that, how do we bring in more revenue for that?
Well, as we move to more EVs, the gas tax won't be there.
Exactly.
So we're going to have to find out what's equitable for everyone to share the cost, because whether you're driving an EV or a gas-powered car, we still need to maintain our roads and bridges.
Exactly.
We need that revenue.
And Vermont is like other states. We try to have a nexus of where that revenue. It's based on how much you use. How much you use the road. And EVs are heavier and on our roads. So we'll be looking at. It's been something that the committee has looked at over the last several years about how to do that. We want to make sure that we're not disincentivizing people from buying electric vehicles at the same time. So there's a kind of there's a sweet spot of, when we're at 15% adoption of electric vehicles for something like this to go into effect. And, there are a lot of different ideas, and those will be some of the ideas that we'll be kind of working our way through. So those are some of the highlights, but we have, a really terrific committee, and we have the Republican Minority Committee on the committee, Patty McCoy, and I just love it that she's in committee a lot of the time, and I look forward to a lot of collaboration with among the committee members, because I think it is really clear to everybody that even though we're a small state, we have a role to play in addressing climate change.
We all have to do our part. Well, we've only got a couple minutes left. Outside the realm of transportation, are there other things you're thinking about that you'd like to see us pass this year? I know one of the things we passed last year was the Reproductive Freedom Amendment, but we need to do more in that realm. I think we have other states looking to us to pass some ongoing legislation in that regard. I don't know if you...
I think it's we want to be a safe state for people to come to access those services and gender affirming care. It's it's really there's a lot to be done in that arena, and I hope that we can also do more for our schools or for our we've done a lot around the workforce, and I hope that we can do some continued work around workforce, especially around teachers, and we've done a lot around investing in nurses, and we'll need to continue to do that. Folks working in the trades, which I'm so excited about, because I think there's some great energy there and opportunities, and that's working. And I really think healthcare workers alongside teachers are really a priority for us. For us to continue to be a really great place to live and work and to raise kids and retire to. Exactly.
Are you hearing from constituents about housing?
Housing continues to be a big concern. Especially my constituents who have kids who have grown up and are trying to move back to Vermont and trying to buy a house. It's been really on their minds. So we invested considerable dollars. It's going to take a little while to see how those dollars roll out. From folks, I have a lot of realtors in my district
Yeah.
too, and who are telling me they're anticipating the market cooling off, which I think is a good thing. But we're going to have to really look at also our demographics and how that all fits into this equation. So there's a lot of work to do, and I think the newly reconfigured committees, so that this can be a very much at the center of our one committee's work in the House, will be really important.
Yeah, well, a lot to do.
A lot to do.
As we continue on, we can check back in and share that with the constituents. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way to reach me usually is via email, because I can look at that during the day, and my email address can be found on the legislature's website, but it's the first initial of my first name plus my last name, scoffey@leg.vt.us. No, that's not it. That's
leg.state.vt.us. But it's not spelled coffee the way the drink is.
No,
right?
it's spelled coffee the Irish way, so it's SCOFFEY.
Yeah.
And also I have a Gmail address that's Sara Coffey VT@gmail.com.
Yeah, and all of us have our contact info on the legislative website, which is www.leg.state.vt.us. And we want to hear from you.
Absolutely.
We are here to bring your voice to Montpelier, and as is this program. So I want to thank all the good people here at BCTV for bringing our voice to you as we bring your voice to Montpelier. Until next time, State Representative Mike Mrowicki here with Sarah.
And Sara Coffey of Guilford and Vernon.
So thank you so much, and bye-bye now.